The air in Willow Creek was thick with dust and suspicion, a god-forsaken patch of dirt where fear, judgment, and simmering hatred were the only things that grew true. But out here in the cool sanctuary of the pines, Cassidy Turner ignored the town's poison. Her hands stained with dirt and blood worked deftly on the Apache warrior's wound. He was no varmint, just a man in pain. This simple act of mercy was her quiet rebellion. It was a dangerous secret. She carried a belief that kindness wasn't a currency to be spent only on her own kind. In a town like Willow Creek, that secret was a death sentence. The snap of a twig shattered the silence. Her head shot up hard, lurching into her throat. Eyes cold and full of condemnation stared back from the tree line. She didn't know it yet, but she had just sealed her fate. Her one act of compassion was about to cost her everything. And you won't believe what happened when the rope went around her neck. Two figures detached themselves from the shadows of the pines. Jebediah and Silas. Men whose faces were carved from the same hard rock and harder beliefs as the rest of Willow Creek. Their rifles were held loosely, but their gazes were tight, aimed right at her soul. The wounded warrior Kael had already been taken by his own people moments before, leaving only the lingering scent of blood and Cassidy's damning act of kindness. "Well, well," Jebediah sneered, his voice like gravel grinding. "What we got here, Silas, looks like an Indian lover to me," Silas answered, spitting a brown stream of tobacco juice near her feet. "Tendin' to the very devils that would scalp us in our sleep." Cassidy rose slowly, her hands held slightly out, palms open. A gesture of peace, a gesture they would never understand. "He was hurt," she said, her voice a low tremor that she fought to keep steady. "I was helping a man." A man. The words felt hollow in the sudden heavy silence of the forest. "That ain't no man," Jebediah growled, taking a step forward. "That's a savage. And you're a traitor girl. A traitor to your own blood." The forest, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a witness to her execution. The tall pines became jury members, their needles whispering guilty verdicts in the wind. They grabbed her arms, their grips like iron bands. The basket of herbs she had so carefully gathered tumbled to the ground, its contents scattering like lost hopes across the forest floor. They dragged her back. A long walk through a world turned hostile. Every rustle of leaves was an accusation, every bird call a cry of shame. Through a gap in the trees, she saw a flicker of movement, a magnificent horse, dark as a storm cloud watching from a ridge. Its eyes, intelligent and fierce, locked with hers for a fleeting second. It was Kael's horse Talon, a silent, powerful witness to this injustice. Then it was gone, melting back into the shadows. The moment they broke from the tree line, Willow Creek rose to meet them like a wave of judgment. Doors creaked open. Faces appeared in windows, pale and hungry for scandal. Whispers slithered down the dusty main street faster than a striking snake. "It's the Turner girl. Saw her with a redskin. Betrayer." The words were stones, and she felt every single one hit. They marched her towards the center of town, towards the office of the man who was both law and gospel. In this place, Judge Josiah Hawthorne. He emerged from his office, stepping onto the porch with a gravitas that commanded silence. He was a tall, severe man dressed in black, his face a mask of righteous authority. He surveyed the scene, Jeb and Silas holding her captive, the growing crowd murmuring with excitement and fury. His cold eyes settled on Cassidy. There was no question in them, only grim certainty. "Cassidy Turner," he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness. "You have been found consorting with the enemy. In a time of peril, you have chosen to aid those who would see us destroyed." He let the words hang, letting their weight crush her. "He was just a man, Judge." Cassidy repeated, her voice barely a whisper, now a final desperate plea for reason in a world gone mad. "He was wounded." The judge smiled, a chilling razor-thin line. "The most dangerous lies are those wrapped in a kernel of truth," he declared to the crowd. "She does not deny it. She admits her sin. This town must be purified of its poison." He looked at Sheriff Brody, who had just arrived. "Sheriff, you know what must be done. Make an example of her. Let all see the price of treason." Sheriff Brody, a man whose spine was made of dust and duty, nodded grimly. He didn't question the judge. No one ever did. His hand clamped onto Cassidy's arm, his grip far stronger than Jebediah's, pulling her away from the judge's porch and into the heart of the square. The gallows was a crude, fresh-cut thing. Pine wood, still bleeding sap. A monument to swift, merciless justice, a hungry shadow in the afternoon sun. The crowd parted for them, a human sea of familiar faces twisted into monstrous masks of hatred. She saw Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife whose son she had nursed through a fever. She saw Old Man Hemlock, whose arthritic hands she often soothed with her salves. Today their eyes held no gratitude, only a cold, terrifying emptiness. They pushed her towards the wooden steps. Each one creaked a protest, a final, mournful song. Her breath caught in her chest, a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs. This wasn't real. It was a fever dream, a nightmare painted in the harsh light of day. She could smell the sweat of the crowd, the sharp scent of new wood, the metallic tang of her own fear. "Get her up there," Brody grunted, shoving her forward. At the top of the platform, the world shrank. There was only the vast, unforgiving blue of the sky above and the sea of hateful faces below. A rough wooden sign was thrust over her head, its splintered edges scratching her neck. The crudely painted letters screamed at the world Indian lover, a badge of her sin. The rope was thick and coarse. Sheriff Brody handled it with a practiced, almost bored efficiency. He fashioned the noose, his knuckles brushing against her cheek. The touch was impersonal, like a butcher handling meat. "Any last words, girl?" he asked, his voice low, not out of kindness but out of ritual. Cassidy looked out, not at the crowd, but past them. Towards the distant line of pines, her true home, her sanctuary. What could she say? How could she explain the truth of her heart to people whose hearts were so tightly closed? Her silence was her only answer. A final, defiant stand. The judge's voice cut through the air again, a final benediction of doom. "Let this be a lesson. Let this be a warning. We will not suffer the serpent in our midst. We will not tolerate weakness. We are a people of strength, of purity of law." The noose tightened around her neck. Rough, suffocating, real. The world dissolved into a blur of light and shadow. The jeers of the crowd faded into a dull roar like the sound of a distant ocean. Her life didn't flash before her eyes. There was only a single piercing thought, a memory of Kael's horse Talon, its intelligent eyes watching from the ridge. A silent promise, a forgotten hope. She closed her eyes, waited for the fall. A sound ripped through the square, not a gunshot, not a scream. It was the thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth, a blur of motion, a force of nature erupting from the edge of town. Talon. The horse was a storm of black muscle and righteous fury. It didn't charge into the crowd. It was smarter than that. With an explosive burst of speed, it galloped straight for the gallows support beam, its shoulders striking the raw wood with the force of a battering ram. Crack. The sound of splintering wood was deafening. The entire structure shuddered violently. Cassidy was thrown off balance, the rope pulling taut, choking the air from her lungs. For a terrifying second she thought it would hold. But the beam gave way. The platform tilted, collapsing in on itself with a groan of dying wood. She fell, not the clean drop of an execution, but a chaotic tumble into splintered timber. The fall, jarring as it was, loosened the noose just enough for her to gasp a desperate, burning breath. Chaos erupted. People screamed and scattered. Sheriff Brody, stunned, drew his pistol. But Talon was already there, a whirlwind of protective rage. It reared up hooves, slashing the air inches from the sheriff's face, forcing him back. It wasn't a wild animal. Its movements were precise, intelligent. It was clearing a path. It spun its dark eyes, finding Cassidy amidst the wreckage. It lowered its powerful head, nudging her, urging her. Her mind, still reeling, finally grasped the impossible reality. He sent him. He remembered. Adrenaline surged through her, a fire that burned away the fear. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the searing pain in her ankle. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she pulled herself onto Talon's broad back, her hands tangling in its thick mane. The moment she was secure, Talon bolted. It didn't weave through the panicked crowd. It crashed through them, a living cannonball that sent bodies flying. They galloped down the main street, past the shocked faces of her accusers, past the judge standing frozen on his porch, his mask of authority finally shattered. They were a single entity of flight and fury, leaving the dust and hatred of Willow Creek behind them as they raced for the one place that had never betrayed her, the deep, silent sanctuary of the forest. The tree line swallowed them whole. One moment they were a spectacle of dust and defiance, the next they were ghosts. The roar of the town faded behind them, replaced by the rhythmic pounding of Talon's hooves and the ragged sound of her own breathing. Cassidy clung to his mane, her face buried in the coarse, sweat-slicked hair. The world was a dizzying blur of green and brown. Trees whipped past their branches, reaching like skeletal fingers, but Talon moved through them with an instinctual grace, a river flowing around rocks. He ran until his great lungs burned. He ran until the sun began to bleed across the western sky. He ran until the memory of Willow Creek was a distant, poisoned ache. When he finally slowed, it was by the bank of a chattering creek deep in a part of the woods she had never dared to explore. The adrenaline that had fueled her began to ebb, leaving a cold, trembling exhaustion in its wake. Pain, a patient predator, began to claim its territory. Her ankle throbbed with a deep, insistent pulse. Her neck was a raw, fiery ring of fire where the rope had bitten into her skin. She slid from Talon's back, her legs buckling the moment her feet touched the ground. She collapsed onto the soft, damp earth, the world spinning. Talon nudged her gently with his nose, his breath warm against her cheek. It was a question. "Are you all right?" I'm all right, boy," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She reached up a trembling hand and stroked his powerful jaw. "Thank you." The words were inadequate. How do you thank a creature for your life? How do you thank the man who sent him? She crawled to the creek's edge, plunging her hands into the achingly cold water. She drank deeply, the water a balm to her parched throat. Then she cupped the water and splashed it on her face, on the burning rope mark around her neck. The sting was sharp but clean. It was the sting of survival. As dusk settled, painting the forest in shades of violet and gray, the full weight of the day crashed down upon her. She was an outcast, a fugitive. The faces of her neighbors, twisted with hate, flashed behind her eyes. Mrs. Gable, Old Man Hemlock, the judge. They had been her world. Now that world was gone, burned to the ground by a single act of compassion. Tears, hot and silent, finally traced paths through the grime on her cheeks. She didn't sob. It was a quiet, hollow grief for a life that no longer existed. Talon stood beside her, a steadfast, silent sentinel. He didn't move, didn't graze. He simply stood guard, his presence a solid, comforting weight in the terrifying new emptiness of her life. He was her only anchor in a world unmoored. She realized then that he wasn't just running from something. He was running to something, to someone. "You know where he is, don't you?" she murmured into the growing darkness, looking at the great horse. "You're taking me to Kael." Talon blew a soft breath through his nostrils and shifted his weight. his intelligent eyes fixed on the path ahead, a path that led deeper into the unknown. It wasn't a verbal answer, but it was a clear one. Yes, trust me. A new feeling began to surface beneath the pain and the grief. It was small, fragile, but it was there. A sliver of resolve. They had tried to break her, to erase her. They had failed. She was still breathing, and she was not alone. She looked from the horse to the dark, unfamiliar path he intended to take. Her old life was over. Her new one, a terrifying and uncertain journey, had just begun. With a groan, she pulled herself up, using Talon's sturdy leg for support. "All right, boy," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "Lead the way." The first night was a waking dream of pain and cold. Sleep offered no escape, only fractured images of the gallows and the judge's merciless eyes. She woke with the dawn stiff and shivering, every muscle screaming in protest. The world was washed in a pale, ethereal light. Talon stood nearby, his coat damp with dew, his gaze already fixed on the path ahead. Her ankle was swollen to twice its size, a painful globe of purple and blue. She was a healer without her tools, a stranger in her own woods. But the forest had always been her teacher. She hobbled, leaning on Talon, her eyes scanning the undergrowth. She found yarrow for the bleeding under the skin, and the broad, cool leaves of a plantain weed. She crushed the leaves between two stones, creating a crude poultice, and bound it to her ankle with a strip of cloth torn from her hem. It was a small victory, a tiny reclamation of herself. They moved slowly, deliberately, a girl and a horse against the world. Talon chose a path of stone and stream, a difficult winding route that left few tracks. He was not just a horse, he was a guide, a guardian. He would stop when she faltered, waiting patiently as she caught her breath, his presence a silent encouragement. She talked to him, her voice a low murmur that filled the vast emptiness. She told him about her small garden, about the way the sun felt on her face in the early morning, about the life they had stolen from her. He would listen, his ears twitching, his dark eyes seeming to understand. 2 days later, they heard the dogs. A distant baying sound that drifted on the wind, a sound that froze the blood in her veins. The hunt was on. Far behind them, Sheriff Brody knelt by the creek where Cassidy had rested. He wasn't a man of imagination, but he was a man of dogged persistence. He saw the faint hoof prints, the crushed plantain leaves, the single strip of cloth snagged on a thorny bush. "She's hurt?" he said to the men behind him. Jebediah and Silas were there, their faces grim, along with 2 other deputies. "Good," Jebediah spat. "Slows her down. That devil horse of his can't carry her forever." "That horse is smart, Jeb." Brody warned, his eyes scanning the impossible terrain ahead. "Too smart. He ain't taking the easy way. He's heading for the high ridges." "Then that's where we'll go," Silas declared, checking the load on his rifle. "The judge wants her back. And I want that horse's hide." The sheriff's face was a mask of grim duty. The judge's orders were absolute, but the escape had been a public humiliation. This was no longer just about the law. It was about pride. It was about restoring an order that had been shattered by a girl and a horse. The baying of the hounds grew closer. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Cassidy. She wanted to run to push Talon faster, but she knew it was useless. They were tired, and she was injured. Talon seemed to sense her fear. He nudged her insistently, turning off their path and pushing through a thicket of ferns towards a sheer rock face. Water cascaded down the rock, a shimmering curtain that hid a dark opening. A shallow cave tucked away from the world. "Go," his eyes seemed to say. "Hide." She scrambled inside her heart, hammering against her ribs. The air was cool and damp, smelling of wet stone and earth. Talon followed, squeezing his large frame into the narrow space with surprising agility. He stood before her, shielding her from the entrance. They were hidden but trapped. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The barking grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. Then she heard voices. "Tracks just disappear right here by the water." It was Silas's whiny complaint. "Spread out," Brody's voice a low command. "He's trying to trick us. Check both sides of the stream. Jeb, take the dogs up the ridge." Cassidy held her breath, pressing herself flat against the cold, damp wall of the cave. She could see them through the watery veil, shadowy figures moving through the trees, their rifles ready. The torchlight of one of the deputies cast dancing, monstrous shadows that played across the waterfall. For a heart-stopping moment, the light illuminated the inside of their hiding place. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying they wouldn't see. Talon stood like a statue carved from night, not even a twitch of his muscles. He seemed to be holding his breath with her. The light moved on. The voices faded. The barking of the hounds grew distant as they followed Jebediah up the ridge. The immediate danger had passed. Cassidy let out a shuddering breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, slumping against Talon's solid flank. He turned his head, nudging her hair with his nose, a gesture of comfort, of shared victory. The sky outside had grown dark, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed from the mountains. A storm was coming, but in the small hidden cave protected by a curtain of water and the loyalty of a magnificent horse, Cassidy felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in days. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something harder, something more resilient. It was defiance. They were still hunting her. But she was still free. The storm broke with the fury of a vengeful god. Rain lashed down, turning the waterfall from a shimmering curtain into a roaring, opaque torrent, erasing their tracks and trapping them in their sanctuary of stone. They stayed in the cave for another day, listening to the thunder wage war on the mountains. It was a time of strange peace. Cassidy's fear, sharp and immediate, cooled into a low, simmering anger. The injustice of it all settled deep in her bones, not as a weight, but as a core of iron. When the storm finally passed, leaving the world washed clean and dripping, they emerged. The air was crisp, the danger from the posse likely delayed by the deluge. Talon rested, and Watered seemed to know their respite was over. He led her higher into the mountains, into a landscape of jagged peaks and breathtaking vistas she never knew existed. The familiar pines of her home gave way to hardy, wind-twisted junipers and vast expanses of rock. This was Apache land. Another day of travel, and the signs became unmistakable. A feather tied to a branch pointing a certain way, a stack of stones that was too deliberate to be natural. Then the scent, faint but undeniable on the clean mountain air. Wood smoke. Talon's pace quickened, his ears pricked forward. He let out a low nicker, a call into the wilderness. It was answered not by a horse, but by a whistle sharp and clear as a bird's. Two men materialized from the rocks ahead. They moved with a silent, fluid grace that made them seem part of the landscape itself. They wore buckskin leggings and carried bows, their faces stern, their dark eyes missing nothing. They saw her, a white woman, ragged and bruised, and their expressions hardened. Then they saw the horse she was riding. Recognition flickered. Their posture relaxed almost imperceptibly. One of them raised a hand, not in greeting but in a signal to wait. Cassidy's heart pounded. She slid from Talon's back, standing on her own 2 feet, wanting to show she was not a threat, not a captive. Talon walked past her and nudged the hand of one of the sentinels, a familiar gesture that confirmed everything. A figure emerged from a path between the towering rocks. He walked with a slight limp, his arm in a sling, but his back was straight and his head was held high. It was Kael. The reunion was not of words, but of silent understanding. Kael's eyes met Cassidy's, and in their depths she saw a torrent of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a profound, sorrowful anger for what she had endured. He walked first to his horse, pressing his forehead against Talon's, murmuring quiet words in his own tongue. A warrior and his most loyal friend reunited. Then he turned to Cassidy. "You came," he said, his voice soft, Talon brought me," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "He brought you because I asked him to watch over you." Kael said, his gaze dropping to the raw red mark on her neck. His jaw tightened. "The debt I owe you has grown too large to measure." He led her into the hidden camp. It wasn't a collection of tents, but a village nestled in a protected canyon, sheltered from the wind and hidden from the sky. Smoke curled from cooking fires. Children paused their games to stare at her with wide, curious eyes. An old woman with a face like a beautiful wrinkled map nodded at her, a gesture of welcome. This was a community, a home. Everything Willow Creek pretended to be. That evening they sat by a fire with a tribal elder named Chaitin. Kael, with Chaitin's help, laid out the truth. "It is not just about the land," Kael explained, his voice low and intense. "It is about the water. Deep beneath the ground, Hawthorne claims there is a spring, the Mother Spring. It feeds every creek in this valley, including the one that runs through your town." He unrolled a piece of old, yellowed hide. On it was a map drawn with charcoal and berry juice showing the spring and the network of underground streams. "Hawthorne knows of it," Chaitin added, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "He wants to control the water. If he controls the water, he controls all life in this territory. He can make his own town flourish and let others wither and die." "He attacked me to provoke us," Kael continued, his fist clenching. "He wanted my people to retaliate. A war would give him the excuse he needs to drive us from this land to claim the spring under the guise of protecting settlers. Your town's fear is his greatest weapon." The full monstrous weight of the conspiracy settled on Cassidy. This wasn't just prejudice. It was a cold, calculated plan for power built on lies and fueled by greed. She thought of the gallows of the faces in the crowd. They were all puppets, their strings pulled by one man. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. She was safe here. She could stay, disappear, let the world forget Cassidy Turner. The thought was a tempting whisper, a life of peace, a life without fear. But then she looked at Kael's determined face, at Chaitin's weary wisdom. She saw the faces of the children playing near the fire. She thought of her own small home, her garden now likely trampled and forgotten. Hawthorne wouldn't stop. He would take this land, this water, and his poison would spread until it had choked everything good from the valley. The defiance she had felt in the cave hardened into a cold, clear purpose. Running was no longer an option. "He used me to make them afraid," she said, her voice quiet but steady, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "He turned me into a symbol of their fear." She looked up, meeting Kael's gaze. "Now I'm going to turn that symbol into his ruin." Kael's eyes widened slightly. "Cassidy, you cannot go back. They will kill you." "Not if the truth gets there first," she insisted, a new strength flowing through her. "They tried to hang an Indian lover. What will they do when they find out their judge is a liar and a thief trying to steal the very water they drink? They won't listen to you. But they might listen to me." A long silence fell over the fire. Chaitin studied her face, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Kael looked from the elder to Cassidy, seeing not the frightened girl who had fled Willow Creek, but a warrior in her own right. He saw the iron in her soul. "What is your plan?" he asked. And for the first time in a long time, Cassidy Turner allowed herself a small, grim smile. "I'm going to give Judge Hawthorne the trial he never gave me." They returned at high noon, not slipping in like thieves, but riding down the center of the main street. The sun was a hammer beating down on the dusty, silent town. Doors slammed shut. Faces vanished from windows. But this time it was not a wave of judgment that met them. It was a wave of fear. The ghost had returned. Cassidy sat tall on Talon's back, Kael riding a borrowed pony beside her. He was her witness, her proof. In her hand, she clutched the rolled-up hide map. They stopped in the center of the square, right beside the splintered remains of the gallows. a deliberate, defiant act. Judge Hawthorne emerged from his office, his face a thundercloud of fury. Sheriff Brody was right behind him, his hand already on his gun. "You dare show your face here, girl," the judge roared, his voice cracking with rage. "After consorting with savages and destroying town property, Sheriff, arrest her. Arrest them both." Sheriff Brody took a step forward, his pistol drawn. But he hesitated. The entire town was watching from behind closed doors and drawn curtains. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Cassidy's voice, clear and strong, cut through the silence. It wasn't the whisper of a frightened girl. It was the voice of a woman who had been to the brink and back. "I'm not here to be arrested, Judge. I'm here to ask you a question. In front of everyone." She held up the map. "This land you live on, this town you rule, where does its water come from?" A confused murmur rippled through the unseen crowd. "What nonsense is this?" Hawthorne sputtered. "It comes from the Mother Spring, doesn't it?" Cassidy pressed on, her voice rising. "A spring that lies under Apache land. The same land you've been trying to steal." She urged Talon forward, stopping directly in front of the judge's porch. Kael moved with her, a silent, powerful presence. "You didn't attack Kael because he was a threat," she declared, her voice ringing through the square. "You attacked him to start a war, to create a panic, so you could drive his people out and claim the water for yourself. You used our fear, your fear, to try and make yourself a king." Lies Hawthorne shrieked, his composure finally shattering. "Slander from a traitor and a savage, is it?" Cassidy challenged. She looked past him at the faces now appearing in the doorways. "Ask yourselves, why has the creek been running lower each summer? Why is the judge the only man buying up all the dry land up valley? He's not protecting you. He's strangling you." The truth once spoken was like a spark in a tinderbox. People looked at each other, the seeds of doubt finally sprouting. Old Man Hemlock stepped out of the general store. Mrs. Gable appeared on her porch. Sheriff Brody looked from the judge's panicked, sweating face to Cassidy's steady gaze. He saw the map. He saw Kael, who stood with quiet dignity, not aggression. He saw the truth. "Judge!" Brody began lowering his pistol slightly. "Maybe we should just hear her out." That was all it took. The betrayal in the sheriff's voice sent Hawthorne over the edge. "Incompetent fool!" the judge screamed, his eyes wild. He lunged for Brody's pistol, trying to wrench it from his hand. "I'll do it myself. I'll purify this town of all of you." The struggle was short and pathetic. Brody, shocked into action, easily shoved the older man back. Hawthorne stumbled, his mask of authority gone, revealing the snarling, desperate man beneath. The town saw him. Truly saw him for the first time. The spell was broken. Men poured out of the saloon and the blacksmith shop. They surrounded the judge, their faces no longer filled with fear of the Apache, but with cold fury for the man who had lied to them, who had tried to steal their future. They took him, not to the gallows, but to the jail. Justice, true and slow, had finally come to Willow Creek. In the quiet aftermath, Cassidy stood by Talon, stroking his neck. The rope burn was a faint scar, now a reminder of what was and what could have been. Kael came to stand beside her. "You have a warrior's heart, Cassidy Turner," he said softly. She looked at the townspeople who were now approaching her, their faces filled with shame and a hesitant gratitude. A new path was beginning, a fragile bridge being built between two worlds right here in the dust of the town square. "I just wanted to help a man," she said, a small smile touching her lips. The long walk was over. She was finally home.